Alright, that's good enough. I'm within 3 thousandths. So I'll pull that away. I back the tool about 10 thousandths away from the crown of the piston. Basically what I did is I loosened up the stop right there, ran the tool right till it touched, tightened that, and then put the dial indicator on it and back that out 10 thousandths. I measured 10 thousandths. So what I'll do now is I'll turn the lathe on and run that back to 0 and then go to -15 and then put the feed rate on and let it drive up to the outside of the piston. So let's just do that. Okay, 14 thousandths. That's it. 40 thousandths. And when I pulled that base gasket out, it dropped that cylinder 30. So I'm adding 10 thousandths to what was their stock. Well, they got to break that inside edge. And I'll do that with a die grinder. And since I'm on the bench, I'm in close proximity to my saw, I put a rag over things so there's no chance of any dust getting in there. Yeah, no more lip left. A little bit more over here, I think. And the next question is, do I raise that right there? I'm inclined to, you know. Let's see what that does. So I took it down about 100 thousandths from where it was, which is something, but not, you know, it's not earth-shattering. Make that edge. Yeah. We'll see what that does. This is a test case. You know? But this saw doesn't matter, so. So basically, this one has trimmed flange, no base gasket, but I'm not trimming the base. Sealed up transfer ports, dropping that section of the flange where the transfers are. It has the intake duration. I added an additional 2 degrees on the piston, not the cylinder, and we'll see what that does. The second thing I'm going to do on this saw here is I'm going to open up that hole significantly to bypass the baffle, like I've done on my other mods. See if that matters. I don't know if you can see in there, but I opened that up by a factor of at least 2, possibly 2.5. Just die grind it right out. It goes easy. It's soft metal. So those are the things that are different on this saw than when it came in the shop. And see if the test case guy, there, that's a better view. I could probably make it more symmetric, but I don't think it matters. Yeah, it matters to me. As I open up that on the inside fairly significantly, I trimmed the flange and I lowered or raised, I guess depending on whether you have it right side up or upside down, I raised that area of the transfer, the entry to the transfer ports up by about 100 thousandths. And that's really the combination of the 30 thousandths that the cylinders dropped plus a little more. And I'm not sure that's going to make a whole lot of difference, but I want to see, and this is a test case saw, and that's what I do, is I try things, and then we see if there's a difference. So I'm going to clean all this mess up and reassemble the saw and bring it back to the guy who's testing it, and we'll see if they like it. I think the other thing I can say is, well, I showed you the nice oil film. I think the other thing to say is I have yet to come up with an easy way of getting that stuff off the darn cases. I will spend more time this morning cleaning the goo gasket off those cases because it is stuck. I mean, it's glued on. I'll spend more time getting rid of that than I will actually doing the job. Well, I think I'm at the point of diminishing returns where I kind of scratched as much as I could off, and then I used, you know, just simply brake clean and a rag to try to get the rest off, and there's most of it off. And but basically, this saw looks fine. I don't see any sign of overheating, blow by. And remember, this saw here, or maybe you don't remember, this is one of my original dead saw salvage saws, where I used the slightly damaged piston and the slightly damaged cylinder, where I just scuffed up the score marks and kept going. And, you know, does it have as much compression as a brand new saw? Maybe not. Well, actually, it probably does because of the pop-up. But it runs fine. And again, this is sort of a test case. I would never do this for real for a person, but I wouldn't recommend it. But I guess the points that are salient here, that are relevant, the points that are relevant are, one, how absolutely flexible a gasket making solution that 1184 is, being able to span that 10,000 gap. The second thing is, yeah, even though I had flange interference with the cases, the 1184 was able to make that bond, make that seal, and basically solve a problem that I didn't know I had at the time, that I know I have now. So the next time I put this together, you know, that 1184 is going to seal even better. This should be a more reliable build. But I got to stress, it didn't actually fail. So what's the definition of more reliable? You know what it is? The definition of more reliable in this case is I sleep better, knowing that I understand these builds quite a bit better now than I did when I first started, number one. And as this saw here gets bounced around from person to person to person, the chances of it blowing up are less and less. Last but not least is, again, this is an early saw. This is like a 2012 generation saw with the original set of cases, the 5-screw cases. So if you run into one of those guys and are not afraid of splitting the cases and putting in some 1184 to help that standard case gasket seal up, actually what you're doing is you're gluing that case to that gasket to the other case. So where it used to heat up and get sucked in here, the 1184 that I used to put these together is not allowing that to happen. So this, on a guy on a budget but likes to build saws for fun, you find a blown up 2012 version, 2013, and want to use those same cases, well, guess what? You probably can. You know, and the other thing that this saw has is that crank where one half I left it alone, on the other half I glued the crank stuffers on with the 1184, and guess what? The side I glued it on is still tight. The side that I didn't got a little bit of slop. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter even a little bit, but I just find it interesting. Because remember, this was when I was thinking that those stuffers were coming loose and building some flakes as it rubbed onto magnesium cases, which may have precipitated a bearing failure. I can't remember if I replaced the bearings on this one or not. I think I did. But anyway, this was like the first one. I'm going to put it back together. We're going to get it fired up, and we're going to see whether or not it runs any different than it did when I took it apart. I wish you could have seen it run. You know, there's one more thing I'm going to do to this saw. is I'm going to do the removal of this material right here. I think that's going to make a difference, helping it run cool. I don't know, I think I've shown you the new covers. They have a slot right there, and they have this. The reason I'm not putting the slot in here is I usually take the decomp right out of them. And I figure that hole for the decomp is letting air out there. Doing the same thing the slot and the new covers do. But this one here, I'm going to remove this. Oh, let me shut it off and do that. How's that? So that's quite a bit opened up. It'll let quite a bit more air out that side. So I think it's time to put this darn thing together. 4 things I changed on this saw. Muffler, trim the flange, trim that back, and trimmed the clutch side of the top. Alright, time to go back together. Now, I gotta think about this a little bit too, because I have found that there are some assembly things, put these tools away, there are some assembly things that matter. You know, the order of events do matter a little bit. I find that for me, with my big old clumsy hands, that it is easier to put the glue gasket on, you know, both the base and the cylinder, or the case and the cylinder. And before I actually set it down, is to attach the fuel line, stick it inside its little clip. It goes, I don't know if you can see it right there, but the fuel line snaps into that, and the throttle cable on, before I actually settle things down. Let me blow this off. This needs a little bit of cleaning. And then once I've got those on, then I can actually set the carburetor. Alright, one of the tests that I'm now doing is just a simple test to see whether or not that thing is going to seat properly. You know, if I can bind that paper to the point where it won't come out, you know, even when I move the cylinder back and forth like that, chances are there's not enough of a gap in there that, you know, the gasket won't seal. Because we spend an awful lot of time worrying about underneath these here and stuff like that. So like over here, that's an area. Well, it won't come out. See? So that means to me that there's less of an issue in here than there was in the flange. Okay? But anyway, as I was saying before, one of the things, there's a few things you got to do. You got to put the ring back on. You know, you got to put the glue gasket on there. But put these in the cylinder first before you set that cylinder down. Trust me on that, okay? Especially on these older ones. For some reason, that diameter is just a little bit smaller on that one than the newer ones. So sometimes it can be hard to get those spacers down in there. But get them all the way in, glue gasket on both sides before you set it down. Okay? And the second thing is, before you set it all the way down, get that fuel line and the throttle cable on. And also right here, see that wire? That wire goes in this clip right here. So you got to get that on there too while the cylinder's somewhat up and out. It just makes things a lot easier. But anyway, cup of coffee, and then we assemble this. Let me see if I can do this in time. So, glue gasket is on. The cylinder bolts or screws are in. Next is to get my this guy right here on. You know, and I'm getting older, so this is not as easy as it once was. A lot of times I can get it going like this and just squeeze. and have it go right on like that. Okay, so now I have piston ring pushed. Now before I go all the way down, boy, I need to do it from the other side, but I'm afraid it's maybe too late already. I sort of start setting the carburetor in there first before I go all the way down with it. While I have the cylinder up, there's a couple things you can do easier when the cylinder is up there than it is when it's down. One is sort of set the carburetor in the manifold, but another is getting that throttle cable in, because it's a real pain once it's already down in there to set that up in there. Well, I don't know if you can see that. I need to get that ignition line up and into its spot too, while the cylinder is still somewhat loose. Right there, see that? That's actually pretty important. So that ignition line in its spot, throttle cable in its, and then the fuel line, well, the carburetor is still out. There it goes. All right. Well, I don't know how much I lost, but it ran out of batteries. But to review, this saw got a few changes. I cut the flange. I raised the section of the flange that is in front of the transfer. Cut the cover, and I modified the muffler. So there's 4 changes. And on the assembly, what I was trying to get to is, before you settle the cylinder down, is you put on the throttle cable and you put the fuel line in its little clip and the ignition wire in its clip before you put the carburetor in. Then after you do that, you set this filter holder down, and you got to make sure that this pin here is on top of the spring for the choke, and then you set those pins into the rubber. And what I do is I do all that before I tighten anything. And I also let the cylinders, while I'm fighting up here, I've got the cylinder where the cylinder screws are just touching but haven't squeezed. And that, I'll let it sit for 10-15 minutes, then go through a tightening sequence like I'm going to do now to tighten the cylinder bolts. And what I was noticing on this was how the goo gasket was squeezing out all sides, where before it had to span a 10 thousandths gap. I also don't know if you saw me where I used a piece of paper to make sure when I set the cylinder down without the piston ring in there to check squish and things like that, is I set a little piece of paper in there and see if the cylinder will squeeze it when I try to pull it out, to make sure that there's no other interference issues like from the caps in, had I not cut the flange. But that little test right there before you actually assemble the saw, where you set the paper inside, set the cylinder down and see if it grabs the paper, I think is something anybody who pulls these apart has to do before they actually put them together. Okay. He's going to be fairly tight. But I'm way happy with the way this saw went together than it was when I first did it. Part of it was because, it was a learning process. Yeah, they're in there. Yeah, this is going to be a different saw. Before I do that, let me tighten this up. And you don't go crazy on this plastic stuff. It goes in there firm. That's it. I use like 2 fingers and that feels right. Oh yeah, different. I think this is going to be a success. Listen to this Carrie Underwood song. Boy, she sings a lot of song about some miserable relationships. The black Cadillac, and nobody can sing like Carrie, there's no doubt about that, but What was that one when he cheats and all that shit? Wonder who the fool was who messed with her. Yeah, I feel way better about this saw than I did before. You know, I also wondered about things like when you drop the cylinder, what happens to downstream things like the muffler and all the other things that are attached. But it seems like they've designed into the system enough slop where that doesn't seem to matter because everything pretty much bolts right up. So, what am I going to call this video? I don't know if I should just call it straight how to remove a 562 cylinder, because there's more to it than that. But, you know, that might be the appropriate. Yeah, you gotta make these pretty tight. Get the air filter on. Get all the junk out of there. I think the next thing to put on is this. Now, I don't know if I had mentioned before, but these, the rim goes to the inside, not to the outside. I've seen quite a few of them where they put them inside out. Like that. And then this little doohickey here goes in there. And this here, see that square section? That goes down. Alright? Because that's what the little plastic square piece rides into. And then one thing is the order of assembly on this is the plastic piece goes there, then the spring, and that goes into the square section on that little lever right there. I got this new saw coming apart, so figure I'll add that right to the video. Dirty cover, sorry. Goes on next with its self-threaded screw. You don't go too awful tight on this one either. Then this little plastic piece here goes next. And what that does is that also helps hold down that sheet metal bracket there. And again, don't go awful tight with that one. Yeah, I know, I should clean that. Then at this point, we are down to putting these on. But I can tell you that this is, you know, I got really used to working on 372s. And being an old man, you know, it's hard to make a change. But I can have this saw apart and back together almost as fast as a 372. You know, once you learn those little quirks about how they go apart and go back together, they're actually pretty easy to work on. Now, had you asked me that back in October, November, when I started doing this stuff, even though the videos came out this year, I was actually on this for quite a long time, I would have said a few nasty things and disagree with you vehemently about how hard it is to work on these things, or easy it is, you know, because, well, I'm sure that the Husqvarna techs get a nice education in their tech school, but I didn't have that. I learned school of hard knocks, you know. Boy, I'm really curious to fire this thing right up and see what it runs like now. By the way, this is where having an electric drill begins to pay off. Let's see if I can get that in there. Don't want to over tighten those plastic things. It's just plastic. You just bring them down and get them in firm. I do 2-finger firm and that's it. Like it, huh? You put the bar and chain back on. There. Blow it off. Kind of like that nasty little ditty where bring a dirty saw to a saw shop is like not wiping your butt before you go to a proctologist. You know? A little bit of gas. Let me get the tool out of the way. So anyway, what we used was this for those self-tapping screws, bar and chain off, variety of things. Throttle cable and fuel line, muffler, carburetor screws and cylinder. Obvious. So they're going back in my toolbox. Spark plug, 5/8. Use this in brake clean to get rid of the goo gasket, which is miserable to get off, by the way. I feel a lot more comfortable with goo gaskets after little experiences like this. By the way, this is not the first one I've done that way. I always test, and then I take things apart and look and test. It's just what I do. I know it's a hobby, it's not a business and all that, so I have the latitude to do that. But it's just what I do. Pump it up. There really isn't much to do to tune these things. You just sort of pull out and up until it pops. And then as soon as it pops, you put it down like that.